Close and personal. Here's a story about this 11-foot 1-inch alligator that I actually knew. I knew where he lived. I knew what he did, and it was my study site in Florida. I'm not going to flip this alligator over because I've got the details and the tag number written. I accidentally drowned this alligator working with a permit to study alligator snapping turtles, but I would see this alligator jump off the riverbank every time I came around the river bend quietly. He'd make a tidal wave. And I mapped out my whole river. It's a small river. I'd canoe up it. It had a good current to it. It was North Florida. And I called it Alligator Bend. And it just would make a huge splash and a huge tidal wave. It'd sit up on all the time on that one bank, all the time, year after year. And then one night I was out on that setting nets on that river, and I saw his back, and I thought it was like a 4-foot alligator, but it was just his back. I'm like, oh my God, he's huge. And then a year later, September, I started trapping that river in 91. And then in 93, in September, the water got real low. And I was out there with Paul Muller from the Game and Fish Commission. He was their herpetologist. And we were snorkeling up my tagged alligator snapping turtles. And I went to this deep pool because the river wasn't flowing very much. It was mostly shallow. So I went to this deep pool, and there was a cypress tree that somebody must have taken down in the 1800s or something. And this big, huge root system was like 12 feet deep to the bottom of the river, and it was pretty clear. And I went up to this cypress root system to look for alligator snapping turtles. And right in front of me, I saw this big foot that I thought was an alligator snapping turtle, but the angle was wrong. And it was like literally 12 inches in front of my face. And it was like alligator foot. I'm like, oh my God, that cypress root is his tail. That's not a cypress, it's his tail. Holy crap. So I came out of the water and I called out to Paul. I said, Paul, man, there is a giant alligator in this pool. Now, it was about a mile down below Alligator Bend, but Alligator Bend was like only a foot or two deep at that point in time, when normally it's like 4 or 5 foot deep. And so I called out to Paul and I said, man, there's a big, huge alligator in here. He said, how big do you think it is? I said, it's 11 or 12 feet long. He says, there's no big alligators in here like that. And I said, yeah, there is, man. It's in this pool. I forgot about the Alligator Bend. Forgot to tell him about Alligator Bend for a couple years. And so I said, let's go take a look at it, Paul. I said, it's wedged up in the root system. It'll still be there. It'll be okay. He says, nah, I've seen enough alligators. I said, well, I'm going to go get a better look at it. And he didn't talk my dumb ass out of it, and he let me do it. And I went back down there, and from about 15, 20 feet away, I could see the alligator was still there in the cypress root system, so I wasn't too worried about it. And I went right up to that damn alligator again like a dumbass, and I put my left hand at his foot, and then I stretched out my right hand all the way across where his tail had been curved. So that was a 6-foot span, because I'm 6'2". So that was a 6-foot span between the tip of my fingers to the tip of my fingers across his tail, but his tail was curved, so that's more than 6 foot. So I came out of the water. I looked at him carefully as I backed up, swimming backwards, and he was still up nosed in there. I got out of that water. I said, Paul, it's back of the foot to the tip of the tail is this far. He says, yeah, that's a big alligator. And then my dumb ass again was in the water with my 12-year-old brother, who's now 41 years old, Ryan. He can attest to this. Well, he wasn't in the pool with me, but we caught this thing in a damn net. He got all the way in an 8-foot net, 3.5 feet wide, and he turned around, and he was coming out, and he got his snaggletooths caught on the throat of the net, and then he spun like that. Do it again. He spun like that with the net and turned it into a big accordion, and it took me hours to cut him out of that net because I really didn't want to ruin my net because nets were hard to come by at the time. And I got him out, and I was trying to float him down the river. And the river was kind of cool still in early July. It was like July 4th weekend. And I couldn't get him all the way out. I had a couple life jackets on him. And every time we go around a bend, the river was current, we just spin. And I couldn't pull him. He was a big 400-pound alligator. So I just tied him to a willow tree. And I went home, and I called the Game Commission, Florida Game Commission. I said, hey, I caught this big alligator in my net and it drowned, and, I just wanted to call you and tell you because, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to get in trouble or anything. They said, no, you're fine. We'll send a nuisance trapper out to get it. So Bobby Bass, man, I called Bobby Bass up on the phone. I said, yeah, the state asked me to call you to come get this big alligator. How big is it? Oh, it's about 11 feet and blah, blah, blah. And Bobby Bass went out there with the John boat. He was trying to paddle his big old butt up the river. And I had a canoe. It's a lot easier to paddle a canoe up a current. And he got up there and they loaded the alligator in the little John boat and they paddled it back and he measured it out, 11 feet 1 inches long. And I said, hey, Bobby Bass, can I get this alligator from you? Can I get it from you and have the skull legally? Is there a way to do that? Because it was a lot of restrictions in the early 90s. In Louisiana now, it's they're a dime a dozen. You can have them sitting on your fireplace mantle. But back then it was kind of restricted. Bobby said, yeah, you can come down and get it tomorrow after I skin it out. And, so I said, okay, where do I come to? He says, oh, you come to Hawthorne, Florida. I said, where to? He said, oh, you just go down to Hawthorne, Florida, and you just ask for Bobby Bass. I said, what? I just come down to Hawthorne, Florida, and ask for Bobby Bass? He said, yeah. I said, like, just pull up to a convenience store and ask for Bobby Bass, and they'll tell me how to find you? Yeah, just come down and ask for Bobby Bass. I said, well, okay, but my dumb ass tried that stupid shit. And I get down to Hawthorne, Florida, and I pull up to the Jiffy Mart. They had Jiffy Marts in the day. I don't know if they still do. And I said, yeah, where's Bobby Bass? And they said, what? What's a Bobby Bass? And I said, well, it's this guy that told me I should come find him. Everybody knows where he lives. I said, well, they said, well, I know a so-and-so bass, but it's not Bobby. I said, okay. And they said, well, I know a so-and-so bass. And so I go to that one bass, and then all of a sudden they'd say, well, you need to go over here. So then I'd go to another bass. And by that time, I think I went to about 5 or 6 basses before I finally found out Bobby Bass was somebody's second cousin or something like that. So then I get down there, and I show up to Bobby Bass's house, and that sumbitch was surprised to see me. And he goes, how'd you find me? I said, well, you just told me to come. You told me it was easy. Just come down to Hawthorne, Florida, and everybody knows you down here, right? I mean, you only got about 100 relatives with the last name Bass in Hawthorne, Florida, right? And I said, yeah, I came down to get my skull. And he said, oh, so he said, okay, let me go get it. And so he goes to the freezer and he pulls out about a 9-foot alligator. I said, whoa, that's not my skull. That's like from a 9-footer, man. He says, yeah, but your skull, the buzzards have done got to it. He says, your skull's in the field and the buzzards already got to it. I said, I don't give a shit. What's the buzzard going to do? I was like a 19-year-old kid, maybe 20 at the time. Shit, I was 22. Yeah, I was 22. I said, the buzzards aren't going to do nothing to that alligator skull. He says, well, you're going to have to get it off. You're going to have to chop it off the carcass. I said, okay, give me an axe. So we went out there to that field, man, and it was just a boneyard of alligators, like hundreds of alligators on a dirt trail in the woods where you could drive down the dirt trail, and there's just alligator carcasses everywhere. And he kept the big skulls. He wanted this skull because, it's a nice skull. We got to my alligator, and he had a hatchet, and he said, here you go. And here, I didn't know how these vertebrae connected to it. I didn't know where to hit it, where to chop it. I mean, if I had a knife or something, I could have got in there and cut it. But I couldn't figure it out. I didn't want to damage the skull. So he ended up having to do it, and it was so funny because it was a nasty smelling wreck. And he about vomited. He was upchucking for real. And I had already, I was paid to work with some dead animals. I was processing dead sea turtles for the Carr Center for Sea Turtle Research, Archie Carr's laboratory, and I was getting paid money to process those sea turtles. And I was working in a nasty, smelly laboratory at the University of Florida, kind of far away from the main part of the campus. And it was crazy. I'd go in there, I'd turn on the radio. Queensryche would be on the radio. So every time I hear that really good Silent Lucidity song from Queensryche, I think of the times that I was sitting in that smelly laboratory at night, and I'd ride my bike home at night about 5 miles. So I'd work in there for 3-4 hours processing those bones and weighing them out. And then I'd ride my bike home. And it was an interesting time. Memories. So I caught this alligator with my 12-year-old brother by accident, and it drowned. And I got that skull from Bobby Bass, but of course I had to go through hell to get it. And then Steve Seitz, the game warden in Georgia, I asked him in my house when he was serving that bogus search warrant, taking everything I owned, how come you didn't take the skull? He says, I could see you got numbers underneath it. I could see it's legit. I'm like, everything in here is legit. Of course, that's subject for debate. But I was acquitted by a jury. It took 4 days. It was like a little murder trial. Sure enough. Let's never let that happen again. Okay, this is a legit alligator. It's got the numbers underneath it. It's got the date and time. It's already been. Well, no, it didn't go through evidence, but Louisiana doesn't seem to make a case on alligator skulls these days. Take care, everybody. Thumbs up, subscribe, and leave some comments if you don't mind. Thank you. Bye-bye. Be safe.